Welcome all. We are thrilled to have you here for our conversation with Melissa Kirsch, and we are so delighted that our very own Peggy Mason, one of the visionary professors here at the University of Chicago, will be interviewing her. Before we get there, though, I should add my welcome. I'm Seth Green, and on a morning like this one, I'm especially grateful to say I'm the dean here at the Graham School at the University of Chicago, and we are the home of lifelong learning. Welcome virtually to our gorgeous campus, which is every bit this beautiful today because it is a blue skies, 60-degree day here in Chicago. So, who says that it isn't great to be in this city in April? We are the home, for those who are not familiar, to the university's really rigorous and deep lifelong learning. And we are an extension of the ideas of this university to people across all ages and stages of life. We are one of the founding divisions of the university because when William Rainey Harper and John D. Rockefeller were setting up the university, they said they wanted to make sure that the ideas went well beyond traditional college and graduate students and really infused citizens across the world. And ever since then, we have been taking the ideas and distinctive values of this institution to people across the world at all different ages and stages. We have many other events coming up in the next few weeks, and so I'll just call out a few. We're going to have on this upcoming Monday, Robert Waldinger talking about the most significant study of happiness. We'll actually have Sue Chan, who was at the New York Times earlier in his career and is currently a fellow here at the Stigler Center, talking about the past, present, and future of journalism as part of our America at 250 series. And then also in the next few weeks, we'll have our First Friday lecture on Polybius and Josephus on the Roman Empire. But the reason that you are all here now, let me take my screen down, is to hear a conversation between Peggy Mason and Melissa Kirsch. Let me add for everyone Peggy's spotlight here. Hello, Peggy. Peggy is a professor of neurobiology at the University of Chicago. From our perspective at Graham, she is also a beloved professor in the Master of Liberal Arts, and she is also the chair of our Graham Faculty Board. And so I will turn it over to her, and then she'll introduce Melissa and jump into the conversation. Thank you, Peggy.
Great. Thanks, Seth. And I'm so thrilled that so many of you share my enthusiasm for um, hearing from Melissa Kirsch, a New York Times writer since 2020. And you may know her. I first became aware of her from her turn at writing The Morning about once a week. And more recently, she introduced a weekly feature, The Good List, which is intended to add joy and meaning to your days. And today we're going to explore Melissa's ideas on how to lead a meaningful life. Welcome, Melissa.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
This is great. So, the first, um, I wanted to explore what you said when you introduced the good list, which is that happy is a state that's become so overhyped and overanalyzed as to become almost meaningless. And you will not find argument from me. And I would say that joy is a close second, particularly since Marie Kondo's moment of fame. Um, and and so it made me think about the Greeks who talked about eudaimonia, excuse me for my stumbling, eudaimonia, which is typically translated as happiness, but my colleagues tell me this is a bad translation. And the word might be better described in terms of virtue, aspiration, fulfillment. And I wanted to hear your thoughts on how would you describe the good life beyond the words of happiness and joy?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to talk about the good life or meaning without using those words, right? We're sort of limited, and right, we turn to the Greeks, to sort of try to help us expand on this thing that feels very large and very important, but for which sometimes we feel impoverished by the language almost because these words feel sort of like conceptual or they feel unserious or something. And so I've been really thinking about this because I say with sincerity that I think we need to take joy and delight seriously. And we need to think about it seriously if we really want to cultivate it. And the more that I think about it and work with it, I feel like happiness, which, and again, that word doesn't feel enough. But it isn't something that we arrive at, or this for me, it's not something that I arrive at. To me, I feel like it's an orientation. And if you orient yourself towards things that, with a curiosity, with a serious curiosity of things that might bring your life meaning, then you can cultivate that. And you have to sort of keep reorienting yourself towards these things. And that doesn't mean that you're wholly orienting yourself away from, the things that don't necessarily bring you happiness, or that you're pretending that those things don't exist, but you are allowing this, that this search for meaning, or this pursuit is exists, and that you want it, and you're admitting that, and that you're going to keep sort of plowing that furrow. Does that make sense? Rather
Yeah,
than expecting to arrive at something, that you're going to keep reorienting.
so I did not understand that it's less of a away from the opposite, the sadness and the angst, etc. It's more towards taking these very overhyped, very Pavlomish, almost Pavlomish type words, and acknowledging that they have depth themselves.
That's right. That's right. And I think the word that I come back to also is balance. I think that, like, when you talk about something, I work at the New York Times, I'm working on this thing called the good list. Is this some sort of antidote to the news that we find so stressful? And, like, I think the answer to that is no, because I would never suggest, and I don't think anyone, who's kind of like serious about living in reality would suggest that you should ignore what's happening in the world around you. But there's more that's happening too, and that we need this kind of balance. Like, I come back to sort of like our purpose, or why are we here on the earth? And it certainly isn't to wring our hands over the things that are stressing us out. I don't think anybody would say that that's their purpose, but they would say that maybe this feels most urgent. So I feel like that kind of being rigorous with oneself in insisting on balance, and insisting that we need this in order to live a full and happy life, is really important.
So, I mean, that's exactly my next question. I mean, can we talk a little bit more about that balance between, I'm going to use shorthand words. As you say, the language is inadequate, but it's what we got. Um, so the balance between, say, joy and meaning,
Hmm.
and that to me, my experience has always been that meaning typically comes from striving for goals and aspiring to achieve, and any aspiration or striving that's worth its weight is going to involve hardship, is going to involve angst, disappointment, and failure. And these are experiences that sit far, far away from joy. So how do you balance these two?
Well, I think that's really interesting, because I think that idea that, joy comes from achievement, like, I think certainly, and that's a sort of subjective thing, right? And for many people it does. And I think, the social sciences sort of are, they're more concrete than sort of the poetic terms that we've been talking about. And they sort of couch happiness in terms of optimization, right? In terms of achievement, in terms of like having a goal and reaching that goal, because this is the paradigm in which we're engaged. It's sort of, I won't get into, the larger sort of incentives of capitalism, but this is what we're used to. This is success and happiness are sort of equated. And success is often determined by some exterior institution or force. And so I think that, yes, like, we can't deny the system in which we live, and the things that we have grown accustomed to giving us satisfaction in that way. I think that joy, and that sort of like, if you talk about sort of like the aesthetic experience of the sublime or something, is very much separate from that, right? And it's something that isn't a linear process. It doesn't have a beginning and an end, and it doesn't have a place of arrival. It's, like I said, that constant sort of like that return and remembering of like, oh, this is what I want. This is what's important to me. How can I cultivate that today without any sort of, without getting too attached to an outcome? So what does it take? What do I have to do today? What are the little things that I do today in order to give myself meaning in this moment?
Yeah, it reminds me of one of my favorite all-time TV show episodes, and this was Northern Exposure. And there was a there's a fictional town, Sicily, Alaska, and the residents fixate on this idea of uh, flinging a cow, but they can't find a cow to fling. So they're while they're trying to find the cow to fling, they're building this enormous catapult as a community, as a group. And they end up they complete the catapult and they find that there's a piano to be had. So they fling the piano. And it is a as it goes flying through the air, it's a very transcendent moment. Um, and they, in the sense that you get is, of course, that it's not the fling, it's not the cow, it's the fling. It's not the end goal, it's the process. And you also get the sense that even if they had not, either the catapult didn't work or they never even found they found something smaller than a piano, that the whole thing would have been a positive experience for so many reasons. And there's so many instrumental steps along the way. Uh, and so the striving is not about the goal. It is about the striving.
Yeah, yeah. I'll get this wrong, so someone can certainly Google it. But Annie Dillard, the writer Annie Dillard, and I think it's in The Writer's Life. She has this line: "How we spend our days is how we spend our lives," and I think about that a lot because um, you know, uh, it can feel daunting, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this to try to architect one's future such that it's going to be a smooth we'll have a smooth journey getting there. And if we do focus on what's happening in this moment, moment to moment, and what we're experiencing right now, the joy in the struggle or the joy in the striving, I think that we have, many more opportunities for happiness, joy, satisfaction, meaning than we do if we are looking towards some future moment when we will arrive at it.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And I don't know if you're familiar with flow, which is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's book. And he advances this idea that to do something that is difficult but achievable puts you into this optimal experience zone. And it's a little bit different from the optimization that you were talking about with the social sciences in a couple of ways, just because the experience itself is biologically experienced as um, absorbing and positive. It's felt as a good thing. Um, the other way in which I think it's very different is that it's internally motivated. There's no
Hmm.
external drive, no external reward, nothing like that. It's internally motivated. Um, and I think this was his version of eudaimonia, that it's pleasurable, but not in a simple way. And so, again, it's it's doing something. If it was easy, it would be boring, and who would care?
Hmm.
If it's too difficult and you can't do it, then it's just frustration.
Yeah. Um, I I think that there's this I was thinking of this book that came out recently that I'm in the middle of. I think it's called The Score. Do you know this book? It's by a philosopher. I think he's at Stanford. And he talks about like games versus sort of like the and why games are fun. And because within the game, basically, I will botch this as well, but within the game, we have, a certain number of incentives, but once the game is over, we let go of those things. And the much of our lives are distinct from games in that the metrics for success are defined by external institutions. And so the book is sort of like, how can we bring this kind of game mentality into our larger lives and sort of change the metrics for success or change the incentive structure, about this. And that to me, I think that, there's something there, right? Like as soon as if we can, to the extent that it's possible, detach ourselves from the sort of external forces and institutions that determine what happiness is for us, then we can determine that for ourselves.
Yeah, so we can gamify our lives. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And that's a beautiful use of evolutionary uh development, evolutionary adaptation. We can use a really good system that our brain has um to figure out the instrumental steps that we need to take.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um yeah. I'm also interested in your views. You wrote you wrote a very interesting post on Christmas songs, which I could not relate to, but I can relate to the idea, not in relationship to Christmas songs. But you wrote a beautiful melancholy,
Hmm. Uh,
and yeah,
um, Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a controversial take, which is that all Christmas songs are sad, or all holiday songs are sad, and but that is sort of what makes them wonderful. And I think that, there are many things like this, and I'm drawn to them. They're very closely tied to nostalgia, and there's sort of I think beautiful melancholy describes sort of like the most sort of ecstatic experience of nostalgia, which is, there's longing in that and there's missing in that. And because Christmas songs come out every year, because, Christmas or whatever any sort of annual celebration or commemoration, it has, if we celebrate it over a lifetime, we naturally are going to develop memories of, the Christmases when we were young, the Christmases when we were in college or what have you. And so each year we sort of re-experience those things, and the music is sort of that sound cue for whatever it represents to you. So even a happy Christmas song sort of brings on that kind of feeling of melancholy, and I sort of marinate in it as the moment, the turkey is digested on Thanksgiving, the Christmas music starts in the CVS, and I feel like I'm sort of thrust back into it, and it's just like a nostalgia bath, basically, and that's very pleasant to me.
so the melancholy, this beautiful melancholy of the Christmas songs, or the moment after the turkey's been eaten at Thanksgiving, is that does that make it onto the good list?
I think it does, I think it does for me, and I mean, the good list is subjective, right? And I, recommend that everybody keep a good list, which is just a way of orienting towards the good. Uh, it's, yeah, absolutely. I think that we have these experiences and we don't necessarily notate them either. Like I think that's something that I'm very or memorialize them in some way. And so that when you have these feelings that aren't necessarily like it's very easy to if I asked you to like come up with five things that in your beautifully decorated room that you're in right now, it looks like you have all of these beautiful objects. And I said, tell me five things in here that you like or that you love. You have these concrete objects in front of you. You could say, I love this vase. This reminds me of this trip I took or whatever. But the feelings and the sort of like states, those things are harder to articulate. And that's something that I'm trying to do with the good list, which is sort of like put a name on it, say the thing. Can you kind of articulate what this feeling is or what this idea is that inspires you or excites you? And I think that those things are, they're more expansive than just like, an object or a person, that you
Or
can
or
name in one
or
word.
a so-called positive feeling?
Sure, yes.
Right, right. And so that so I'm seeing that your conception of the good list is much more expansive than I I had understood. And I think that's really valuable to value the entire emotional landscape.
Yes, yes. I think John Kabat-Zinn calls it the full catastrophe or full catastrophe living, which, and his idea of catastrophe is not in sort of like the calamity sense, but just all of it, this too. And I was writing about this week for my column on Saturday, which is like, yes, in the sadness there is beauty, that, just sort of like understanding that many emotions and many perceptions of things can exist at once. And this can be, we can take it all in and kind of find meaning and joy within that and from it.
And so I don't know if you're familiar. Eric Wilson wrote a great book called Against Happiness,
Uh-huh.
okay, which resonates with my contrariness.
Uh-huh.
Um, and he says, pharmaceuticals are diminishing the proportion of Americans that are melancholic. And he takes the imaginary trip. What if pharmaceuticals did what they intend to do and they wipe out melancholy?
Hmm.
And this is what he says. This would be an unparalleled tragedy. We would live in a world in which everyone simply accepted the status quo, would simply be content with the given, a dystopia of ubiquitous placid grins, a police state of Pollyannas, a flatland that offers nothing new under the sun. And you wrote something very similar. There's plenty to be sad or cross or dissatisfied about. We shouldn't stop wrestling with those things or trying to change them when we can.
Hmm. And, for better or worse, I don't think there's a pharmaceutical yet that can kind of eliminate our concern about those things, right? It seems like there's a an endless menu for us to choose from. So lucky for us, we there's no risk, I think, that with the good list or with sort of orienting towards the good, that we're going to become Pollyannas who only see the good in the world. I think it would be the rare person who was able to achieve that in this moment and really in any moment.
Yeah, yeah. I think we're going to get to uh, questions from the audience, and I'm getting some questions. I want to get back to gratitude, which quite a few people have asked about. But before we do that, I do want to connect with you on the piece that you wrote that made me say, Seth, we need to bring Melissa Kirsch here, which was your really brilliant insight into the 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 fight between optimizing or paying attention to the current self or the future self. And you did this in a very everyday situation, which is parking a car in a parking lot. And you
Hmm.
said, when you back into the parking lot, when you back into the parking spot, you are advantaging your future self, so it's easy to get out. But when you pull in, you are advantaging your current self. You're making it harder for your future self, but you're making it easier on your current self. And I just love this. I wonder how this is obviously applicable to many more decisions or many more choices that are far more momentous, such as should I take chemotherapy and feel crappy, possibly live, or should I forego chemotherapy, feel great, and then die earlier? But many such decisions, and at various time points, near and far from the now. And so I'm just curious, have you thought about does this example, does it generalize at all? Is it a standalone? What are your thoughts?
I mean, I think, this is obviously like a very small instance, as you said, and I'm not sure. And before today, you sent me some readings from your class about this, and it totally many things blew my mind. So I hope you're sharing that with everybody on this call about kind of our and this is all fascinating and that like I don't know a lot about neurobiology or neuropsychology, but I do know about living life as a human being, and the idea that we do things all the time so that our future selves will have an easier time. And I use the example of sort of like cleaning the house every night before you go to bed because you know that future you doesn't like to wake up to a mess. But I also, I disadvantage future me by staying up really late, knowing that I'm going to be exhausted tomorrow. And the speaking of old sitcoms that have funny bits, there's a Seinfeld bit in which he talks about night guy and morning guy, and basically the person who's like staying up late and farting around and not thinking about the future says, oh, tomorrow's morning guy's problem. I'm night guy. Like night guy can, stay up and do whatever he wants. I'll leave everything else to morning guy. And so we do have this idea of our separate selves or something, and we sometimes we take care of them. Sometimes we say like, I want this to be easier for my future self, or like I'm going to uh and sometimes we don't. And uh one of the pieces that you sent was, or one of the theories that you introduced to me was about how we think we know what our future selves are going to want, but there's actual like biology in the brain that determines our future happiness that is much more compelling than our idea that of our own sort of ability to do this. And I would you say something about that? Because I've been thinking about it a lot.
Yeah, this is a work on what's called neuroforecasting. And the idea is that you take a bunch of people and you ask them, you give them very brief looks at a bunch of different GoFundMe type presentations. And you ask them, which one do you want to fund? And at the same time you're asking them that, you're also imaging their blood, the blood usage in their brain. So what's called functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI. And, and so, what's shocking is that the signal, the fMRI activation in one particular part of the brain, in the nucleus accumbens, which is a very special part of the brain, um, is more predictive of what thousands of people will choose than the people's choice. Okay, so essentially, you are choosing using a noisy signal from your brain. You get it right a lot of the time, but not always. And the way I explain this to my students is this is like sitting down. And if you haven't had this experience, raise your hand and tell us the secret. But you sit down at a restaurant, you order what you want, and immediately or shortly thereafter, you figure out that was the wrong choice. So you are not a perfect chooser. You're not a perfect chooser, even given the information which is there, but you still have to decode it. You have to decode it and say, that's what I want. And
Mhm.
so this neuroforecasting is just fascinating work. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me feel shaky about my sense of my own free will. Or
Well,
or my or
free
my
free will's not a big player in neurobiology.
yeah.
So, um, but anyone who wants to tackle that question can come to the class. This is something that we talk about a lot. Yeah. So, do you want to say a word about gratitude? I think it's a very particular feeling, and I think people feel I was I've been doing stage back I'm backstage for a production right now, and I'm fine watching it from the wings, but the stage manager wanted to let me sit in the audience, and she worked really hard to cover what I did so I could sit in the audience. And I didn't actually care. I didn't particularly want to, but I realized she wanted to give me that. I needed to provide her with that feeling that I was grateful to her. And I think that's a gift that you give. And it connects to the to give is to get idea.
Mhm.
So can you say anything about where gratitude fits into a meaningful life? Is it useful to feel grateful?
Oh, yes. And I mean, I feel like gratitude is one of those things that has just sort of been studied so much, and how, like, articulating or expressing gratitude does increase our well-being. I'm so interested in what you just said, though, about this person that you worked with needing to
He needed to
feel
give.
your gratitude. And so
Yeah.
which is, just sort of like such a complex transaction. Um, and so I want to think about that. But as far as, like, people talk about a gratitude practice, and I'm not sure what distinguishes gratitude. I mean, I think, a practice specifically, it gives it a consistency. Um, there's and that, typically involves some variation on, like, before bed, write down three things that you're grateful for each day. And, that is a lightweight form of journaling, which we also know can be, very helpful psychologically to us and to get to our well-being. Something that was introduced to me to sort of couple with gratitude, which I do find very useful, is an appreciation practice. So, in addition to writing what you're grateful for each day, you write about you. And this at first I was like, why would I do this? Write three things that you appreciate about yourself from the day. And there's something that felt, self-indulgent about that, and, like, and difficult, like gratitude is it's about other people. It's about, my community and interdependence. Why would I, sit down and write how great I am? Well, once you start doing it, you realize that there are many things that happen in the course of a day that no one else would remark on. It's not like, oh, your hair looks great, or you really killed that presentation. It's like, oh, I, like, didn't, like, get, irritable with that guy that always annoys me at work or whatever. And, like, I appreciate that about myself. Like, that was something that was hard for me, or that I was concerned about, and I did that. And no one else knows this, but you write it down, right? And, like, the more you do that, the more you're sort of saving up for the bad days when you're feeling poorly about yourself, and you can look back at all of those things. And also, I found that once I started doing this appreciation practice, I started living my life such that future me at the end of the day would be proud of me.
Please, please, that's
Right?
great.
And
Yeah.
so I would find myself in the course of the day knowing that I was going to do this at the end of the day, thinking, like, well, if I do this, I'm really going to appreciate that about myself later, and it feels so good
You know,
to do that.
yeah, that is so close. And it feels so close to the John Stuart Mill concept of you got to satisfy the person in the mirror,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So
Yes.
you're saying, I'm going to be the person so that when I look at myself in the mirror, I'm happy with who I see.
Yes, and we talk about liking ourselves or loving ourselves, and, I think we all feel like, yeah, I like myself to varying degrees, but, I'm aware of my flaws, and, all of these things. But there's this sort of, like, the project of, every day sort of writing down the ways in which you are sort of wonderful, or you are kind of trying and making things work for yourself, is a practice of cultivating self-love, which is very powerful if you can kind of, like we said, at the beginning of the conversation, sort of like let go of the kind of syrupy, or sentimental uh,
Yeah.
valence there.
And also crafting the person that you feel is ethically the right person to be.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's a powerful lens. So here's a question which I agree with this. Joanne Penny asks, that kids will often say, I mean, okay, let's not fool ourselves. It's not just kids. That's a tomorrow problem, and they use that to procrastinate. And so this advantaging the future self or the current self, when you advantage the current self, you procrastinate essentially. Um,
Hmm.
yeah. Um, so is that the basis? Do you think that is the basis for this procrastination? Is that a way around it to then
Think about the future self.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I procrastination is, you know, it's an epic struggle for me all the time. And there's a great book about procrastination that I love by Neil Fiore called The Now Habit, that um in which he has when I read it, I felt that I hadn't seen the ideas for conquering procrastination that he has in his book. And one of the things that he talks about is scheduling play before you sort of schedule everything else. So he calls it like the unschedule, and where you, instead of trying to fit the things that you want to do, like on a Saturday, around, all the things that you have to do, you start with the things that you want to do, and then you have a really good sense of how much time you have for the things that you have to do, because the work is going to expand to fit the time that's there. It's just a different way of thinking about our lives. Like I said before, like we're not, if you asked how do you want to spend your Saturday, Peggy, I'm sure you're not like, how I want to spend my Saturdays is errands and chores. Like that's what right? But errands and chores are important and then they give their own satisfaction. But like you want to go to a museum, you want to spend time with your family, you want to relax, you want to read a book, you want to do all of these things. This is, how you spend your day is how you spend your life. Like schedule those things first and then see where the errands fit in. That to me is very helpful in uh, and then scheduling and getting the work done, right? Like if the point is procrastination, then okay, from 12 to 2, that's when I'm doing the errands because I've got to be, at this soccer game with my kids at 3 o'clock or whatever.
Right, right, right. I just have to say, as an aside, we had a special collections exhibit in association with a court theater production of Augie March. And we had Saul Bellows' actual calendar. It was obviously a physical calendar. And it was the month that he won and had to go to Oslo to get the Nobel Prize in Literature. And there were two things scheduled the entire month of December. And one of them was crossed out so that he could go to Oslo.
Hmm.
And this is so foreign to a modern, insanely busy life.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Um, okay, so Denny Roberts asked, does the possibility of constant turmoil in life uh, open the opportunity to strive while at the same time letting go of an ideal of human perfection? So welcoming, there's a possibility of constant turmoil in life being welcomed, open the opportunity to strive while at the same time letting go of this ideal.
I think so. I think, constant turmoil or however you interpret that, that like you're you can only control so much, right? Like you can't control the wind, you can control the direction of your sails. So yes, I think that like kind of like how am I going to work within this system, within this reality that I have been dealt.
Yeah, and accept those things that you can't do anything about.
That's right.
Right. Uh, let's see. Would you embrace memory as a positive thing if striving, eudaimonia, lead to repetition without the achieving? And I don't think I could stand the frustration and boredom that would follow. Is the comment. You have yeah.
Um, yeah, tedium in life is something that is also sort of inescapable, and so I don't have like, there's much that's been written about sort of, like like the myth of Sisyphus or whatever, like how we find meaning in, uh the most boring and tedious forms of turmoil. Um, but I yes, I think that I think that's the challenge though. I mean, I think that we we we're we're engaged in whatever, we're engaged with whatever systems or whatever obligations that we have, and then we're, you know, to find the meaning in the madness, or to find the meaning in the struggle is is I think it's always possible. I think it's always possible, and I think that it. I mean, to not to come back to this, but like you just have to reorient yourself. But I think that there. I'm thinking of my, relatively frictionless life and the lives of people who have really suffered. And, I'm thinking of Viktor Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning and all of these things where like if you look to these sort of if you look to these texts and these experiences of um, you know, deep struggle and see that people were able to find meaning in those, I think that it sort of helps reframe what you're going through.
I am a huge fan of Viktor Frankl, but that aside, yeah, it's funny. I have this book on basically on the issue of time that a Stanford Business School professor wrote, and I should know the name of it, but I don't. Um, but one of the exercises she asks you to do is just sort of keep track of what you're doing and how you feel.
Hmm.
And so, you're supposed to be unhappy doing chores.
Hmm.
And I was keeping track of it, and I realized that as I did the chores, I was flying because I just got to think. And I could not have been happier. So it is, and which I think resonates with what Csikszentmihalyi would say, is that it's not about anything in particular. It's not about anything physical. It's about what happens upstairs. Um,
Hmm.
and you can create your own misery, your own happiness. And sort of um along those lines, there's been a idea that people have a thermostat essentially for how happy or how unhappy they are most comfortable at. And how do you think, what do you think of that idea?
Um, I hope that's not true. As someone who is like constantly in pursuit of more of these good feelings, I hope that's not true. I've heard this also about like your weight, that it's
Yeah,
all, and
it's
all of
this,
this.
it's very similar to the
Yeah,
Ponderostat.
like
Yes.
a thermostat.
Yeah.
And and that, that's disappointing too. Um, but yeah, what I think of that is that like I hope that's not true. And I I also, if it is true, I'm going to function under the belief that I have not yet reached that maximum temperature that I am capable of.
That you're biologically oriented to.
Right.
Yes. Okay, so now Rana Khan asks a very Aristotelian question. Can happiness exist without contrast, without suffering, loss, or dissatisfaction? How much of happiness depends? Well, let's leave it at that. I think that's enough of a question. Um,
Yeah, I think that what you said about that book Against Happiness, I think that
yeah,
that's true. Like you know, we understand the light because we understand the dark. I mean,
yeah,
that seems true to me,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Um, okay, so any final thoughts? I think are we at time, Seth?
We are at time, although
Okay.
this has been a wonderful
Yeah.
conversation. So I say that with great regret because your insights have been
And I
magical.
want and I want to
And
say hello to a lot of wonderful people that I see online. Beth Bacchus, oh, it's so exciting to see you, and people from my class, etc. And I'm so glad that so many of you joined us. Um, Seth, this is going to be available online as
yes,
a
all of
recording.
this is recorded and will be available. And we should give you the final word, Melissa, if you have any
Yep,
parting thoughts for
absolutely.
us.
Wow. I don't have anything really profound to say. I guess I have to say that like I'll say what I'm going to go and look up when we get off this call is this what I will think about is what Peggy said about understanding that somebody else needs you to have the experience of gratitude. And just to think about that because that's really profound. And so there's this like generosity that's coming from you, Peggy, in understanding this and giving them gratitude. Or, you know, because I thought you were going to say that once you sat in the audience, you were so grateful, like that you didn't think you'd be grateful, but that you were. And so there's something there about like, uh, well, also like sort of like the choreography of gratitude, but also the that we are all characters in somebody else's play, and that we have roles to play. And when you sort of understand, like, oh, here's my role in this moment, that can be, that's something that you might appreciate about yourself later in the day or whatever. But that, like, as you sort of seek to increase your own happiness, remembering that you are, constantly in interplay with other people who, and you are an actor in their drama as well.
Seth, can we take one more moment on this
We
topic?
can because you're in
Yeah.
charge here, Becky.
Okay.
Go for
Okay.
it.
Well, I don't know what the timing is like, but so I learned this not from people, but from rats. So in my rat work, I watch rats help other rats, and the helped rat doesn't care. It wouldn't it likes being helped. It likes not being in this tube anymore. But the rat that shows lots of energy is the helper. They are very pleased and proud of themselves. And this resonates with experiences that I imagine people have had. So, for example, I was in Paris. My mother was supposed to join me. She broke her foot, so she didn't come. I had 2 tickets to an art show, to an art exhibit at one of the museums. And there was a long line, and I tried to give it away. And the first person I tried to give it away to just thought, I wanted to kill them or something. I don't know, whatever, something stupid. So it just was stranger danger and wouldn't talk to me. And I felt bad. I didn't feel good. I felt bad. And then the second person was totally gracious, very, they could have walked away and thrown it in the garbage, but I felt good because they acted as though they were grateful.
Hmm.
And it really reinforces this idea, this tale that to give is to get. And it is the giver that gets, not the getter. And so you have to, I think most people have learned the lesson at some point in their lives that you have to allow people to give you stuff. You have to accept with grace when
Yes.
somebody really wants to give you something. Okay, that's great. So, yes, I totally resonate with what you said.
Excellent.
Well, this has been a fabulous conversation. Peggy, thank you for being both a moderator and an expert on so many of the issues. And Melissa, thank you for sharing your immense wisdom. And thank you all for joining us for this very special conversation. And hope everyone embraces these values as the day continues. And I will certainly be thinking about what am I grateful for within myself tonight, as well as others, as I reflect with my diary. Thank you all. Have
Well,
a
I
great
can
day.
say that we are all grateful for Seth, who
Oh, okay.
leads the
Thank
Graham
you.
School beautifully.
See, now I know you're just saying that to feel good yourself, Peggy.
I
But no,
am,
I'm
and
just
I
saying
feel
that
very good.
jokingly.
I feel very good about you, Seth.
I feel very good too hearing that. So thank you, and thank you both. Have a great rest of your day to all.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.